of a company widely recognised as Australia's custom feeding specialist. Drawing on his experience as feedlot services manager for Primac, Charlie started Mort & Company in 1997, well known in the industry. Charlie, please make your way up here. Come on, Charlie. Shy retiring type. Next, Troy Setter, CEO of Consolidated Pastoral Company since July of this year, relatively new in the gig. Troy, CPC is Australia's largest private beef producer with a portfolio of 19 stations across northern Australia and a joint venture with 2 feedlots in Indonesia. There he is, he's creating havoc already. And Jason Strong, a household name in the industry, MD and CEO since January of this year of AACo, the Australian Agricultural Company, and involved in all facets of the beef business, from breeding and feeding to processing and marketing. Please welcome our panel, ladies and gentlemen. Share the mics between you. And guys, can I just generally, from what Mick has said, what is some of the top of mind stuff that you're thinking about following Mick's presentation?
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks for the invitation for being on the panel. There were 2 things I thought were pretty telling in that presentation from a stats point of view, where the slide that Mick put up with the 90-odd 93 industry organisations representing Australian producers in some way, but then when the questions were asked about what were the things which prevented people from signing up, unity was only 11%. So you think that maybe that's a big chunk of the problem, that we actually think that more of these is better.
But many of these organisations, like for instance Alpha itself, specialises in one little corner of the industry like many of the others done. Can you really look at a disparity and say this is a problem when you have organisations that are looking at their specific niche in the industry, Mick?
No, I think there's no problem, and in fact specialised organisations that look after a very well-defined group and pursue their interests with quite clear direction actually do pretty well. Right. Until you get to some of the major national issues. And then that's where the challenge lies, because you just haven't got that critical mass and usually haven't got the resources, say, at a national level. So say if we addressed the issue of animal welfare or something like that, trying to get the critical mass at that national level is a real challenge.
The horticulture guys probably don't care much about animal welfare issues. Is this part of the problem? Is this part of the problem that their interests become, shall I use the word, selfish when it comes to national interest?
Look, I think there's probably a reasonable amount of truth in that. I think there's nothing wrong with having that many different organisations if they can actually work together when needs arise.
And that's the problem.
And that's the thing we don't seem to be able to do.
Charlie, Troy, got any suggestions or answers on that?
I think it really hit me that there's over 90 organisations. I sat back and counted last night how many CPC's a member of, and we're a member of 11 organisations specifically around different beef things. But to see 90 up there, I suppose if you look back at some of the challenges that the beef industry in particular has had is no one actually knows who to stand up or where to stand up, and then if they do stand up, one of the other organisations sometimes will bite at them, or that lack of unity when there's a big problem on, I think is a challenge. But
so even, Troy, in this one corner of the entire agricultural firmament, there are 11 organisations involved in some way in beef.
That we're a member of. Now, some of those obviously are breed societies, but they're state-based organisations, they're export organisations. Some of them are, say that they represent the grass-fed producer, that then creates confusion about, well, what's grass and what's grain and what's good beef and what's bad beef. And, from a lobbying point of view, you go and talk to a politician and they're sitting there saying, well, who actually represents the beef industry, or who actually represents the red meat industry, or who represents farmers? It's certainly an easy way to be played off when you're lobbying.
Charlie, why have we got so many, and is this a failure of the leadership of the industry itself to prevent such a disaggregation?
I guess, why have we got so many bodies? They just keep on building up over the years, and I guess that's what I think we've discussed, trying to break that, move back to less bodies. But I guess, on the feedlot industry, you look at Alpha, there is I would think most people in the feedlot industry, we're quite happy with the way Alpha is, on animal welfare issues. We have a very strong body there on all the requirements that we need, whereas there's a lot of dissatisfaction in the other industry bodies because I think it's just so fragmented, the whole industry, and there's so many different requirements.
Mick, usually when a new body starts up, it's usually in response to what is perceived to be a failure by the existing bodies. Am I right?
Probably, yes.
There's a need. The need has to be addressed. Let's start a new organisation. Troy, you're nodding your head.
Yes, I think so, and I think one of the challenges is around this issue of engagement. That advocacy is all very well and good, and everyone knows that hopefully that's happening. But often people want a reason for engagement or an opportunity for engagement. So when you look at the farm bureaus in the US, most of the activities occurs at the county level. So the county will hold a workshop on employment contracts, or the county will hold a field day on the new corn trials, or the county will hold a presentation on chemical use or something like that. So it's very much hands-on at the local level. And then out of that, those that are interested can get involved at the higher levels. So my sense in Australia is that that's where we've made the mistake, and that's why so many disparate organisations form up, because they want that sense of engagement, that sense of involvement around very specific issues, but we haven't got a structure there to consolidate those interests at a higher level.
So it's basically a failure of leadership of these organisations to fully engage with and address the issues of their members. Member organisations are funny things, and they're run by members. And I think one of the problems is that as the membership has become less attractive, the new entrants, the younger members of the industry don't bother to join. So those organisations become ossified. The old stages retain the reins and control them, and unfortunately they, in that process, probably become less attractive to new entrants, who then perhaps look to other organisations or look to other opportunities to get involved. I haven't heard that word ossified for a while. In Ireland it usually means pissed as a newt. But that's the Irish vernacular. Troy, you wanted to add something to that discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, certainly agree with Mick on that. But I think no organisation has a right to exist, and there's still a few organisations that sort of have this view they have a right to exist. And I think you've got to earn the right. You've got to represent members and add value to members and do something that members can't do for themselves. And you've got to keep doing that. You've got to go and secure future for your members. And just looking at that number of organisations up there that were there, I don't think some of them are going to make it, and I don't think that's a bad thing. And so I suppose going out on a bit of a limb there, but I think Alpha. It's not just because we're here today, but Alpha's a very good organisation. They reinvent themselves. They blood new members, blood new executive. There is this challenge that I see that's looming in all organisations around the lack of resources, the lack of free time that members have to come and volunteer on organisations. And I think one of the things that most agricultural organisations are struggling for is financial capacity and people capital, and how much energy and time, and do they need to employ more people rather than keep pushing on the same members all the time. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we're going to face is, do we keep in agricultural organisations asking members to stump up with their time and be on boards and effectively act as executive directors rather than directors, or do we have to be smarter with the spend and employ good people in those organisations and let them do the grunt work?
Now, CPC is a member of 11 organisations. Can you, when you sit down and look at the membership fees you have to pay to all those organisations, can you honestly say that you need to, in terms of what your business is about, belong to all of those 11, or it's a case of, if I don't join the 11th one, I might be missing out on something?
Yeah, there's a little bit. There's also sometimes you pay membership and hope that it gets better next year. But and I think many big organisations are challenged with this. Is, do you just go and employ your own lobbyist?
Yeah, that's a good point.
We that's a challenge that we face, and at times we actually do do go and spend some money to get someone to go and take an issue direct for us, because to work through, and Alpha is great, doesn't have this problem, but in some organisations, to work through the branch level, the grassroots level, get to a national conference, get it approved as policy, the issue's just gone.
So you belong to 11 organisations, yet you still think about employing a lobbyist yourself. Jason, do you have a similar view on a position? Do you still see that fragmentation of the industry?
Yeah, certainly. I think the fragmentation bit and the unity piece is one of the key issues with this. But so on the number of organisations, there's organisations we're not renewing memberships to, and they're more peripheral.
Right.
And it's making that decision around what do we actually get out of this process. But none of the mainstream ones, but more of those peripheral ones. And we say, money is not the solution. That's a bit hard for us, being the largest contributor to a number of these organisations. So when people say we need more money, it's like, well, we're kind of giving you more than everybody else. So I'm not sure we're the right people to talk to about that. So it's not a single, because if you then become a single contributor or the major contributor, then that's a bit of a challenge as well, because then you do get motivated about getting additional help. But maybe things aren't bad enough. So we
need a crisis.
Well, yeah. So without being too confrontational about it, but maybe things aren't bad enough. The fact that we can actually spend our time reinventing the wheel, and we can actually spend our time trying to replicate what is already being done by somebody else because we believe that we can do it better or someone else isn't doing it right, then maybe things aren't bad enough for us to get focused on the issues to get them resolved. And if you look at the organisations that have been successful over time, and some of them only in a snapshot of time, and Alpha's obviously one that comes to mind, and you think about how Alpha operates, and it's very focused.
Yes.
So issues that relate specifically to people that intensively feed cattle in a small area.
But the question
it's very focused.
But the question that Mick brought up earlier, Jason, is does Alpha play well with others higher up the chain?
Yeah, a separate issue though. So you can't say that we're going to have an organisation very focused and successful, but then judge them on a set of standards that relate to somebody who's not very focused in a specific area. But you look at one of the other organisations which I think has been the most successful over the years is the Cattlemen's Union, which came out of the 1974 beef crisis, dissatisfaction with the Central Queensland Grazers Association, a lot of resolve, a lot of motivation and action to make change, and they were very effective. Diminished over time, but were actually effective and had quite a bit of impact in a very short period of time because they were focused and had some resolve about making significant change.
Charlie, do you agree we need a crisis?
I think a lot of cattle producers would say that they've had the crisis. But look, I think it's there's so much dissatisfaction out there because...
With whom or what?
Well, a lot of cattle producers, basically just aren't getting the returns that they require.
Right.
So, and that just gives rise to, the dissatisfaction. So they're looking for something that, that magic bullet or whatever. So,
is that a lack of market power? Is that because people are working as individual producers rather than together?
Yeah, and I guess that's the difference with Alpha. Like we're all just working together. We're
common goal, that kind of thing.
Like whereas there is a lot of different directions that everybody in the grazing industry is heading, and they all have very different views. And I think that's I actually think obviously we all believe that cattle prices are going to go up a lot. I think you'll see a lot more satisfaction. All of a sudden with the lobbies. And yet
the Senate, one of the Senate's recommendations was that the grass-fed industry establish its own organisation. That would make it then 12, Troy, to belong to. Mick, how sensible a recommendation was that?
To be brutally honest, I read that report twice and I found so many factual errors and mistakes in it. When I got to the conclusions, I couldn't understand them.
Yeah. Well, it was compiled by politicians. What do you expect?
It didn't make any sense at all, what the recommendations were at the end. So I was a bit nonplussed by the whole thing.
All right, let's open this up to the floor. If you've got questions, put your hand up right here in front. Do we have a spare microphone? Yes, we do. Barb is off again. Hot to trot is Barb. And if you want to text, there's the number on the screen, which will flash up any moment now. And text in your question. There we go. Add your company and your name as well. Yes, sir. Go hard.
Thanks. James Nason from Beef Central. A question for Mick, but I guess for any of the panellists if they'd like to answer it. You did say, Jerry, that Mick's on the hot seat, so I thought we'll put him on the spot with a question. If you were Barnaby Joyce, about to make a decision on the grass-fed beef industry and what should happen with Cattle Council, maybe MLA, what would your recommendation be?
That's called a pointed question.
I mean, I'd prefer not to try and make a recommendation there. I think there is a real challenge around understanding, having producers understand who does what role. I think there's a lot of confusion about the mission of the various different organisations and what they do. So there's an expectation around groups like MLA, for example, that they'll get involved when the industry gets into trouble, even though they're specifically precluded from doing that. I think there's a lot of expectation that Cattle Council should do something, but no one wants to be a member or pay any money to have that operation running, and no one wants them to get statutory funding because that's not representative. So I think until perhaps we have to clean up the statutory funding and limit that right back, and then talk seriously about what sort of structures you need in place. Because I think one of the confusions arises from the fact that farmer organisations and producer organisations should help set the strategic direction and then mark the homework. And it's really difficult to mark the homework if you're also reliant on that same organisation for a substantial proportion of your assets or your resources. So I just don't think that structure can work in the longer term. So it may mean that we need a really, really, really slimmed down national cattle body, and that has a really strong focus on those two areas, setting the strategic direction for MLA and marking the homework of MLA, and being able to do that in a fearless way rather than always being worried about being compromised. But I'm not sure I'm answering your question to any great degree other than stating some principles.
Let me say, you've read the Senate report twice. You couldn't understand the recommendations. Does that make you fearful for the future of the cattle industry as to what Barnaby might do?
Establish a producer-owned organisation for grass-fed industry. Well, MLA is, in a sense, a producer-owned organisation. Whether you want to fragment it into grass-fed, grain-fed, sheep, don't forget the sheep are in there as well, goats.
Pigs?
And no, pigs aren't in there.
Aren't they?
You know, I wonder whether there's sufficient differentiation between those different industries to make it viable to split that organisation up. That's my sense of what they seem to be recommending.
Good point. We've got a text question coming in. From an organisation's point of view, do you think the directors or board see it as a prestige thing for themselves rather than what is best for the members, particularly in smaller organisations? If so, what impact does this have on the members, you cynical person, you? Let's have a crack at that. Troy, let me start with you on that one. Well, we can easily accommodate you with the microphone.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know whether I really want to answer it. Yeah, I think there is in some organisations. There is a bit of you've earned your stripes, you've done your time, and you get to go to the national organisation or the national conference. And sure, you want experienced people up there, but we also want the best people. So I think in some organisations, for some positions, you know, if I'm brutally honest, I think the answer to that question is yes. But it's not for all organisations or for all individuals.
True. But all organisations, as you said, there are some organisations that should die, naturally, but they won't because their members will fight for them. Because these organisations are like military units. Their first duty is to their own continuance, and then we'll go fight the war.
Yep. There is, and if those organisations have members that want those organisations to exist and those organisations are prepared to fund themselves properly, yep. You know, no one can stop them from existing, but I think we've got, just following on from what Mick was saying about splitting organisations into grass and grain and other proteins. I mean, it gets very confusing. You know, I think there's opportunity to pool more of the back offices of peak councils and you know, similar type organisations, and sure there might be, you know, committee structures or commodity specific representation, but I think there's opportunity to do more pooling rather than splitting, because none of us want to write bigger cheques.
True.
I'm sure we'd all write bigger cheques if we could really see more
The value.
and we had
That's
to.
right.
But no one wants to write bigger cheques just for more back office bureaucracy.
But can I put it to you that if the minister is still dithering about what he might do and everybody is shitting themselves with the prospect, and there's a Senate report with recommendations that can't be clearly understood by an industry leader, where was the industry when this Senate was happening? Why didn't those 11 organisations, particularly in the beef industry, for instance, influence the decision to come up with recommendations that could be understood? I'll leave that one sitting there. We've got another text question.
Sorry, Jerry.
Sorry, Jace, yeah, go.
I think it's probably the result of having 93 people having input into the question.
Too many.
Yeah.
Too many. Okay, good one. All right. A question for Mick. If you aren't supportive of the use of levies to fund membership organisations, how did these organisations survive financially into the future, Mick?
Well, again, and perhaps it wasn't crystal clear from the research, but all the organisations we looked at internationally, with the exception of the Federated Farmers and with some qualification there in New Zealand, have a substantial suite of services and member-specific things that they provide. And in fact, if you look in Australia, two organisations that I think do that well are Alpha in terms of accreditation and a range of services around the operation of a feedlot, and Cotton Australia, which has established a BMP and is very focused on making sure the industry works appropriately in terms of stewardship and those sorts of things. So both those organisations have gone beyond just advocacy to a broader
provision of
level of services.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question. The peak body for farmers, for agriculture in Australia is what?
Well, I guess the National Farmers Federation.
You guess, but you can't actually definitively say that this is the peak body, right?
Well, no, it is, but not all, as you saw from the graphic, not all organisations are involved in that organisation.
So isn't that the organisation then that should use its good offices to unite in some way the voices of these other organisations? Isn't there a failure of leadership at the NFA level is what I'm saying?
Well, one of the problems is that the NFF is actually a product of the constituent organisations. So it's the spire of the cathedral, but the foundations are a lot further away. And if the foundations are weak, as anyone in building knows, fiddling with the spire doesn't really change much. And I think that's one of the problems. The focus has been on fiddling with the spire, the NFF, and trying to restructure that numerous times, when in fact the weakness is the organisations on the ground not attracting sufficient members, not having resources to actually put some capital into a national body. And therefore, that's where the problem starts.
Anyone else want to grab a piece of that?
Yeah, I will. If all these organisations are membership-based, then largely they reflect the membership. So isn't a fundamental part of the problem the engagement of the membership and what they actually ask for and what they do? So rather than then focusing on solving an organisation that someone's a member of, it appears that the solution is sometimes seen as let's start up a new organisation because that'll solve the problem.
That's right. It's easier sometimes.
But if the members are the fundamental problem, because they've created the membership organisation over here, then history would say they're going to do it again. So that's one challenge. The other one is that what we ask these organisations to do needs to be realistic. And if you look at the ones that are successful, it's a focus on a small number of things that are relevant to the membership and the skill set of the people who actually manage them. And you see the broad commentary or questions or suggestions that these organisations should do certain things is quite often, impractical, unreasonable and just not possible. So it's like MLA should increase farm gate prices. Well, it's just not going to happen. So they just can't do it. So getting some perspective is pretty important.
Charlie, do you want to grab a piece of that?
And I guess I just agree, with Jason about that. The members, the people paying the levies, everybody has in our case, the beef industry, if we weren't paying the levies to MLA, there would be, obviously there's so much funding that comes from those levies, and you'd never raise that type of money. No. Now, there's a lot of us that would say that possibly the funds aren't spent that well or whatever, but there is still a need for a lot of funding, and I can't see how that would be raised.
But you're talking about R&D. So I'm making a very clear distinction between advocacy
and R&D.
And R&D.
Yep.
R&D levies, no problem with that at all.
But there will still be people who will say our levy money is not being spent properly, let's start the revolution. Any more questions from the audience? I've got a text question waiting, but I'm conscious of the fact that you've paid to be here and that you're entitled to ask questions. Anyone else? Or are you happy to watch the bloodbath up here? Is it all going well? Right down there in the middle, there's a question. Thanks, Bob. It's going well so far, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah, Scott Braund. Not sure who it was, but Jason, it might have been you that talked about the vast majority of the massive number of organisations we have, and we talked about, well, how did the Senate end up, this far away from what the industry maybe thinks, and I guess I'd contend it's just a result of the massive amount of empathy we see in our producer base and just low engagement and poor connection, and as a result of that, I guess the noisy few perhaps get a greater hearing at a political level than what the broader base of industry does, and just
so
like
members
to hear
are
people's
being
opinion
apathetic. On that. Members are apathetic. They don't get involved. They don't raise their voice, and a few noisy people are making the rules.
Well, there's potential for that to happen.
Yep.
I think it's not a bad assessment of what happened. So there was some petitioning of the minister to have an inquiry. So he had an inquiry, which then had an open slather for contribution. So at a personal level, we didn't make a direct contribution to the inquiry. We chose to go through the organisations. But that meant we made multiple contributions.
Right. So you went through Alpha, for instance?
Well, and so AgForce and NTCA.
And the other 11 organisations you belong to?
Yeah, not all of them contributed. But the big issue with that was nobody had a common view.
So there was a disparity of view.
And that even strengthened our resolve for not going direct, because another view wasn't actually going to help solve the problem. So, and one of the challenges we've got is we've said we want the minister to actually run an inquiry. So now he's run an inquiry with all these disparate views.
And he's got to pick one of those.
And so he's come back and said, well, they've come back and said, this is what we've got out of this process. And so we actually don't really like that either.
Is that just the nature of the beast that you're going to get this disparate view, or should there be a more united view?
Well, it is the nature of the beast, but it's also a result of asking the question of somebody who's actually disassociated from the industry as well.
Yeah.
So unless the industry's got some resolve internally, or the industries have got some resolve internally to try and fix this.
That's a good point.
And if you just look at beef alone, unless we can get a core group of organisations together on the beef side to have an open, honest, sensible conversation, knock out, drag out, whatever it takes, around what we are going to need to move forward, then it's never going to be fixed.
All right, we got a question on social media, on text here. In terms of advocacy, producers are being encouraged to sign up for Facebook or Twitter to tell their story. Do you think this is going to be an effective way to being a voice for the industry? I guess what we're talking about is if we've got such a disparity of voices, is it a good thing to be taking all of these different opinions to the populace, Troy?
I think from an advocacy point of view, yes, it is. I think the more people in the industry and in the parts industry that are telling the story, telling the truthful story, we've got to market our industry. We have no, there's no right for grass-fed or grain-fed or any other part of the beef industry to be there. Any particular day, we've got to earn that right. We've got to build and maintain a social licence. So I think, yes, the more producers, the more feedlotters, the more meat processors that actually tell the good news story about the red meat and beef industry, the better. The more people that go to social media to vent their frustration about industry structures is probably not so helpful. Right. There is a process there. I think follow that process. I think as a red meat industry, we should, in a closed door, really debate the issues, challenge those issues. But when we leave, it would be ideal if we spoke with less than multiple voices.
Charlie, you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And but I thought with the live export, that was social media. That's where we really saw it play out, and there was a lot of positive stories that came out of that. So that's certainly that's probably what I think that had. Around Australia-wide and probably worldwide, it got the message out.
Yeah, we got a follow-up text to that last one. How can advocacy groups better target voters and the community? Now, Mick, you mentioned this.
And this is what we were talking about in that research around the issue of e-capacity. So if you go back to the LiveX situation, May 2011, Four Corners was on the Monday night. Animals Australia and Get Up had campaigns, web-based campaigns, ready to go. Immediately that program was over, they sent out emails to their members, so 3,000 or 4,000 members each. Each of them had links back to the program and footage. Each of them also had a convenient box that you could click there to send an email to every member of Parliament with one click, and each of them had a donate button just beside that. So by lunchtime the next day, the Minister's office had over 10,000 emails had come in.
And none of them from the industry?
None from the industry. By the end of that week, most of the politicians had upwards of 30,000 emails coming in on that particular issue.
Yep.
And a lot of them, in the discussions I've had with them, said, where was the industry?
Exactly.
I didn't hear a single word until the second week almost from the industry. And so the capacity to be able to do that and mount those sort of campaigns doesn't exist within the agriculture sector.
Indeed, and it's in a slightly better place now with Ag Chat Oz and a few other initiatives like that. Farmers and producers in general are getting a bit better at using these tools. We're almost out of time. Is there any final questions from the audience? Just one here in front from Matt.
Matthew Keogh from Fairfax Media. Mick, is there perhaps some merit in doing away with the state-based organisations? It seems that success lies with organisations like Alpha and Cotton Australia, very focused on their a very tight sphere of self-interest. State-based organisations try to be all things to all farmers.
Interesting question, Matt. I've often made the observation, you may have heard me make it here, that Australia is not so much a nation as a loose confederation of lightly warring political entities. Mick, should we do away with state organisations and look at more industry-focused and based ones?
Look, I mean, I'd prefer not to be prescriptive about commodity organisations or state-based organisations. They're member organisations. I think state organisations do have a role. There's quite a lot of issues that come up at the state level that those organisations can bring focus to and deal with. So, you know, I don't think it can be prescriptive about one layer disappearing or whatever in that regard. But if they haven't got a viable business model, then I think you do have to start to think seriously. All those 43 horticulture organisations, for example, the bulk of them wouldn't exist if they didn't get the statutory levies from what was HAL to fund most of their organisations. So, you know, maybe a bit of a cleaning out of the stables there might narrow down that population a bit and get them a bit more focused on, you know, the sort of things they need to do to attract members, which I think is quite an important thing. So I'd prefer not to be prescriptive about whether it's commodity or whether it's state or whatever, but basically mean that, you know, they have to have a function and they have to be able to support the business. I think that's the critical test.
Right, last word on this from Jace.
Thanks, Jerry. I think what Minister Keogh should do is
I was waiting for that.
You know, give some responsibility back to the industry and you know, get a very focused, you know, group of leaders from the industry and pick them. And there's individuals we could come up with. But we've got to remember that the tenure of the current structure isn't that bad. It's about 16 years. Normally this is about a 10-year cycle, and within that 16 years that MLA's been in existence, AgForce was formed by the combination of UGA, Cattle Council and grain growers. ABA didn't exist when MLA was first put in place, so the general tenure of this thing being around 10 years, the current structures actually haven't gone too badly, but we've got an opportunity now with some focus on it to actually get back and get some control, and for the industry to actually take a bit of control of the agenda, and I think that's what we've got to petition the Minister for, to say rather than actually have some of this infighting which is now starting, let's get back to a core group of people who can start providing some leadership on the issue.
Written, authorised and spoken by Jason Strong. Ladies and gentlemen, please give our panel a big round of applause. That was fantastic. Thanks, guys.